Hey guys, today we are talking about turning points of the Civil War. Remember, a turning point is basically a moment where the course of events shift in a different direction. It can be in a good direction or a bad direction. Basically, the turning points we're going to talk about today are going to be moments during the war where it's looking more and more like the Union is going to win. So we'll start off with the Battle of Gettysburg as our first turning point. So it's the summer of 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation was released a few months earlier, and this is basically like the middle of the war. It's been going on for about 2 years, and it has about 2 more years left. Obviously, they don't know that at the time, but we do. Um, Union morale is low. It was increased by the Emancipation Proclamation and the Battle of Antietam, but now it's on the downhill again. The Confederacy is winning battles. For example, the Battle of Chancellorsville. Um, and they lost one of their important generals, Stonewall Jackson. He was killed. Actually, he got hit with friendly fire, but then he died of an infection that was due to that wound. But anyway, the Union troop morale is pretty low. They need a victory to kind of increase public opinion and increase confidence in the war. And they see that victory with the Battle of Gettysburg. So Gettysburg, we'll look over here to map, is the second major battle that takes place in the Union. The first one was Antietam. Gettysburg is the second one. This is the furthest north that the Confederacy ever gets. Basically, Lee invaded the North, invaded Pennsylvania, and he is quickly met by Union troops. They fight for 3 days. This ends up being the deadliest battle of the Civil War. Over the span of those 3 days, about 50 to 51,000 people end up dying in this battle. The reason why we consider this battle a turning point, though, is for several reasons. One is because it's a Union victory. This is going to increase morale and confidence in winning the war, as well as we can kind of look back from from present time and see that after this point, the Union starts to win more battles and the Confederacy starts to lose more battles. Also, the Confederacy never invades the North again. At this point, the Confederacy is basically going to be retreating. It's going to be moving backwards further and further into the South. And then lastly, this battle is the inspiration for the Gettysburg Address, which is one of the most famous speeches in American history. The battle was in July. In November of that year, the battlefield is turned into a cemetery to honor the people who died there. And Lincoln is tasked as president with giving an address. And back in the day, the general consensus was, or the general idea was, the longer you speak, the more respectful and the more like honorable your speech is. And so the guy before Lincoln talks for like 3 or 4 hours, gives this incredibly long speech. And then Lincoln stands up and he gives a literal 2 minute speech, and he got criticized for this. Some people were like, it's too short, and then his supporters were like, no, it's sweet and in short, and it's perfect for the occasion. And looking back in history, most historians would agree that yes, it was perfect. It was just what the country needed at that moment. The actual text of the Gettysburg Address, it's here. It's really short. This is a picture from the Lincoln Memorial. It's on the wall there. But basically, what it's saying is that the people who died here will not have died in vain. We're going to continue fighting and we're going to win this war and we're going to unify this country. And we're also never going to have this country get into a war like this again. We're going to learn from this after we win. So you can read the full text of the Gettysburg Address if you would like. You can even click on this video if you want in the notes, and you can go like listen to it. But it's a really, solemn, serious, and very poignant speech that Lincoln gives. Okay, so that's happening up in Pennsylvania. At the exact same time that that's happening, a really big victory in Mississippi is happening. So by the time the spring of 1863 rolls around, Vicksburg, this little town right here on the coast of the Mississippi River, is the last Confederate stronghold along the Mississippi River. If the Union can get Vicksburg, then they will have complete control over the river, which would be step two of the Anaconda Plan. And so the Confederacy is really trying to defend Vicksburg with everything they have. And they're going to put up a fight. And so Grant's troops basically surround Vicksburg for 2 months. They don't let anyone or anything in or out. They bomb it constantly, basically forcing the people inside to just get tired enough and hungry enough to surrender. And it happens. On July 4th, 1863, the Battle of Vicksburg is won by the Union Army when the Confederate troops inside Vicksburg surrendered. So at this point, the Battle of Vicksburg is a turning point because now the Mississippi River is completely in control by the Union, so they can, control all the trade and everything on it. And the Confederacy is divided now into two halves, as well as Grant is going to gain a lot of fame and respect from this, and he eventually is going to be promoted to lead the Union Army. All right, another turning point that we see is Sherman's march to the sea. So General Sherman, he is a Union general. He wants to use a type of warfare, a strategy called total war, which is basically this strategy where you attack your enemies' civilians and their homes, and you try to weaken morale and destroy supplies. The goal here is not to kill civilians because it's like basically against the rules of war. Um, it is more just to hurt their property and like take away their property. Because if the people on the home front don't support the war, or they like literally can't support the war because they can't give food or supplies to the troops, then that makes the army weaker. So Sherman really wants to do this in Georgia. So what he does is from November to December 1864, Sherman takes his troops on a march to the sea, so a march east, where along the way, General Sherman and his troops, they burn down towns and houses and fields, and they take supplies and animals and things like that from the Confederate people living there. Again, Sherman told his troops, do not hurt civilians, don't kill them. The goal is not to hurt them, the goal is just to hurt their property. And for the most part, his troops listened. So it leaves a path of destruction from Atlanta to Savannah. When Sherman gets to Savannah, it's basically deserted. People had left, they had run away. And he saves Savannah as a Christmas present for Abraham Lincoln. But that's why in Savannah, a lot of the buildings there predate the Civil War because it wasn't burnt down. Then, over the span of the next few months, Sherman is going to march his troops north through South Carolina, again, burning stuff down along the way. Eventually, Fayetteville, Goldsboro, and then he gets to Raleigh. By the time he gets to a lot of these North Carolina towns, the war is looking like it's going to end. And so he actually saves Raleigh from being burnt down too, which is why in Raleigh there are buildings that definitely predate the Civil War as well because Sherman didn't burn them down. Okay, but why is this a turning point? Well, it hurts the Confederacy. It makes it harder for them to support the war and to give supplies and stuff like that to the troops. And it also helps the Union because they're like, hey, like we're winning. Like the South is really hurting. And a lot of people, associate this with Lincoln. And they're like, well, Lincoln is the guy who's in charge of the war, and we're kind of winning the war now. So it helps Lincoln get reelected in 1864. So the last thing we'll talk about today is that election. So in 1864, while this war is still going on, we got to have an election. It's a little bit weird. You can see here the Confederate states don't participate, obviously. And then also the territories don't get to participate either. So it's really just the states and the Union. The two major candidates running are Lincoln for the Republican Party and McClellan, who was fired by Lincoln for the Democrats. The main campaign issue is what to do about the war. So Lincoln is saying, all right, we got to force the South to surrender, then we can quickly heal this country. McClellan's idea is we don't know how long this war is going to go on. We should just compromise with them, possibly letting them keep slavery as maybe one of the compromises. Well, as you can see, Lincoln sweeps it. He wins very, very easily with the Electoral College, and his vice president is a guy named Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was actually a Southern senator, but he did not secede. He was the only politician to not leave with his home state of Kentucky. And so Lincoln has him on the ballot to try to kind of win some of these border states, which he wins most of them except for Kentucky. And so when he's taking office in March 1865, it's looking, excuse me, very much like the war is going to end soon. Actually, the war ends in a month. And he wants to tell the country, as well as the Confederacy, kind of how he envisions the country healing. And so what he says is, we're going to continue fighting, we're going to force the South to surrender, but then when the war is over, we are going to heal our country as quickly as possible. This is really summed up with this line where he says, with malice toward none and charity for all. So basically being like, no ill feelings after the war. We just want to heal all of these wounds that the war has created. And that is kind of what he envisions for the end of the war and how to reconstruct the country afterwards.